The knife in my hand felt heavier than it should have, its silver handle cold against my palm. I hadn't even cut myself a slice of the cake I'd paid for. The cake everyone was praising as if it had magically appeared under the white tent. Fairy lights shimmered overhead, soft music carried across the garden, and my son, my Thomas, stood at the center of it all with a champagne glass raised high. "I want to thank the people who made this day possible," he said, his voice carrying easily. My heart stirred, my spine straightened. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe, after months of sleepless nights, canceled doctor's appointments, and $80,000 drained from my retirement account, he would see me. His eyes swept over me without stopping. "First, Emily, the love of my life." Applause burst. He smiled at his bride, radiant in lace and diamonds. Then his voice deepened with something like reverence. "And of course, my mother. The woman who has been like a real mother to me from the very beginning." Every muscle in my body went rigid. He turned, not to me, but to Rebecca Hamilton, Emily's mother, elegant in blush silk, a hand pressed theatrically to her chest. The crowd erupted again, clapping, cheering, some even dabbing at their eyes. I did not move. Behind me, someone whispered, "Is that his real mom?" Another voice answered, "No, she's just a friend of the family. A friend." After 32 years of raising him alone, of night shifts and scrubbing blood off ER floors, of sewing costumes and saving pennies for college tuition. A friend. I placed the cake knife carefully back on the table and drew a steady breath. My sister's voice called my name, hushed and frantic, but I didn't turn. I walked past the tables I had decorated with folded napkins and roses, past the favors wrapped by my hands, past the arch of flowers I had chosen. Not a single person stopped me. Not a single hand reached out. Outside the tent, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp. I kept walking, heels sinking into the damp grass. What would you do if your own child erased you in front of the world? The night air stung as I walked across the lawn, but it was nothing compared to the sharpness inside my chest. I didn't look back at the glowing tent or the applause that had just buried me alive. Instead, I kept walking, my shoes damp with grass, until I reached the car parked on a side street. When the door shut behind me, silence pressed in. No music, no voices, just the sound of my own breathing and the words replaying in my mind. The woman who has been like a real mother to me. I drove without a destination, the Charles River unfolding beside me like an old confidant. Streetlights glimmered on the water, reminding me of nights spent teaching Thomas to drive along this same stretch, his hands nervous on the wheel, my voice calm and encouraging. He'd been mine then, before the Hamiltons, before the polished world that seemed to have rewritten his memory. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the clock on the dashboard read close to 10. The house was dark, silent, yet bursting with memories. On the hallway shelf sat a photograph of Thomas at age 6, missing his front teeth, holding a baseball bat twice his size. His grin had been all for me. I touched the frame, but my hand trembled, and I pulled away. I wasn't ready to collapse. Not yet. Instead, I climbed the step stool to reach the cedar box hidden in my closet. The air changed when I pulled it down, filled with the faint scent of wood and years gone by. I carried it to the dining table and began unpacking the truth of a lifetime. Report cards, college acceptance letters, Mother's Day cards with misshapen hearts. One in crayon, "To the best mom in the world, even when you're tired and sad." I smoothed the paper flat, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Piece by piece, I built a portrait no speech could erase. The receipts from the caterer, the florist, the venue, the late-night emails with Emily, where I adjusted menus and finalized color schemes. evidence that it had been my sacrifice, not Rebecca Hamilton's money, that had made the wedding shimmer. I printed them out one by one, the hum of the printer steady in the quiet house. Each page slid into a growing stack until the table was covered. By midnight, I had arranged everything into a single manila envelope. Not a weapon, not a plea, just truth. On the first page, my handwriting cut steady across good stationery. You said she made you the man you are today. But the woman who carried you, fed you, paid for this wedding, and whispered your name with pride through every storm, that was me. I sealed the envelope and sat back. The hollow ache inside me had shifted, not to rage, not even to sorrow, to clarity. The next morning, Nathan came. My younger son had seen me leave the tent the night before. His arms wrapped me in a hug before I could say a word. "What he said wasn't right, Mom," he whispered, fierce and certain. "I know," I said, and for the first time I believed it. I handed him the envelope. "Give this to your brother. Tell him to read it slowly." He hesitated, eyes narrowing at my steady face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I don't need an apology, Nathan. I need him to see." After he left, the house felt lighter, though no less empty. I brewed tea and sat on the porch, looking over my garden. Rows of flowers I had planted with my own hands bent in the breeze. Unlike my son, the garden never forgot who had tended it. Days passed. Then, on a Saturday, Thomas rang the doorbell. Alone. No Emily, no Hamiltons. Just my son, standing on my porch like the boy who used to knock after curfew, unsure of the welcome he'd receive. "Mom," he said, his voice rough, "can I come in?" I let him enter, but the air between us was different now. He sat on the edge of the couch, not sinking into it like he once would have. His eyes darted to the photographs on the wall, me holding him as a baby, him at graduation, the three of us smiling in the kitchen. "What do you want?" I asked simply. He swallowed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to? Or you didn't think I'd notice?" His gaze dropped. "Everyone said Rebecca deserved to be honored. She was present." "More present than me?" I cut in, my voice calm but sharp. He flinched. "I didn't think it through. The Hamiltons, they have connections. They've helped me with work. His words stumbled, collapsed into silence. "No, Thomas," I said softly. "You did think it through. You chose applause over truth, but I am not a prop. I am the story." For the first time, his bravado cracked. He sat back, running a hand through his hair, a boyish gesture that pierced me with memory. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," I said. "There's nothing to fix. There's only remembering or forgetting." He stayed for over an hour. We circled around the edges of what had happened, skirting direct apologies, talking instead about logistics, about Emily's confusion, about Rebecca's thinly veiled fury after reading my envelope. He didn't realize I already knew Rebecca's outrage wasn't confusion. It was exposure. When he left, he paused at the door. "I'm sorry, Mom, really." "I know you are," I said, "but sorry isn't the same as understanding." He looked at me like a boy again, small in his grown man's suit. For a moment, I wanted to pull him into my arms, but I held still. After the door shut, the quiet returned. Yet this time, I breathed easier. For months, I had been eroded by small dismissals, pretending not to notice as I was edged out. Now, at least, the truth stood between us like an unmovable stone. The days blurred. Then came an unexpected knock. When I opened the door, it wasn't Thomas. It was Olivia, my goddaughter, balancing a bakery box and 2 cups of coffee. "Banana cake," she said with a grin. "And caffeine. Figured you might need both." She had grown since I last saw her, 22 now, her mother's eyes flashing with the same mix of kindness and steel. She set the cake on the table, her expression shifting. I saw the video. One of the bridesmaids posted it. I saw your face when he thanked her. The thought of strangers replaying that moment made my stomach clench, but Olivia leaned forward, her eyes unwavering. You didn't flinch. That strength. It's rare. I want to grow into that. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Strength? It hadn't felt like strength. It had felt like suffocation. But in her gaze, I saw something I hadn't seen in weeks. Recognition. It's not strength, I murmured. It's what we do. We hold it together, because falling apart isn't an option. Olivia shook her head. No, that is strength. Anyone can fall apart. It takes real power to stay whole. Her words seeped into the cracks I hadn't realized were still open. We spent hours talking. About her mother, about school, about the mess of love and loyalty. When she left, she hugged me tightly. My mom always said you were the strongest person she knew. Not because nothing hurt you, but because you never let hurt change who you were. I stood in the doorway long after she was gone, the sunset painting the street in gold. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something like peace. The manila envelope had been my first line in the sand, but it wasn't the last. Boundaries don't announce themselves with fanfare. They whisper through small refusals, through moments when you decide you will no longer shrink to fit someone else's version of you. I didn't fully realize I had crossed into new territory until the night I returned to the wedding venue. It wasn't for closure or dramatics. I had simply left my purse under the dessert table, forgotten in the rush to walk away. The manager recognized me when I came in. We've been keeping this safe for you, he said, handing over the leather bag with a quiet smile. Everyone kept asking whose it was, he added. No one seemed to know. The words landed heavier than he intended. Of course, no one knew. I had been erased in real time, my son's rewrite complete in front of 200 witnesses. Still, I thanked him and on impulse, walked through the garden where vows had been spoken. The arch still stood, stripped bare of roses, just wood and wire now. I stepped beneath it alone. There was no music, no clinking glasses, just the wind pushing through the empty chairs that had been hauled away. It should have hurt, but it didn't. Instead, I felt oddly free. I didn't need their photos to prove I had been here. I didn't need their applause to confirm what I had given. The ones who truly see us never need a microphone to remind them. That night, I invited Nathan and Olivia over, along with my sister Sarah. We spread old photo albums across the dining table. Thomas as a toddler with frosting smeared across his cheeks. Thomas in his football uniform. Me in the stands holding a thermos of coffee after another night shift. Laughter mingled with wine, filling the house in a way I hadn't felt in months. Olivia paused at a photo of me holding Thomas in the snow, both of us bundled in coats. You look exactly the same, she said softly. How's that? I asked, smiling. Like you never needed to be thanked to be powerful? Her words clung to me. I carried them like a shield in the days that followed, especially when the Hamilton scandal exploded across the news. The headlines were everywhere. Hamilton Financial under federal investigation. CEO Richard Hamilton accused of fraud. It was like watching an avalanche swallow the mountain that had crushed me. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of millions missing, lives shattered, retirees robbed. My first thought wasn't justice, though. It was of Thomas. Whatever happened to the Hamiltons would bleed into him. His connection to them wasn't just social. It was marital, public, stamped on every newspaper. I called him. It went to voicemail. I left a message anyway. Thomas, it's Mom. I saw the news. I want to know if you're okay. Call me. I didn't expect a response, but less than 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with his name. Mom? His voice was strained, the edges frayed. I was about to call you. Are you all right? Are you? I asked. A long pause. It's bad. Worse than what they're reporting. The FBI raided Richard's office yesterday. They're saying he's been running a Ponzi scheme for years. Emily's devastated. Rebecca's not speaking to anyone. Something cold settled in my stomach. And you? How are you involved? I'm not, he said quickly, his voice cracking. But people think I am. My firm put me on administrative leave this morning. They don't want the appearance of impropriety since I just married into the family. I closed my eyes, hearing the frightened child inside his 32-year-old voice. The same boy who once clung to me during thunderstorms. What do you need? I asked. Silence stretched, then. Can I come over? I need to talk to someone who isn't a Hamilton. An hour later, he sat at my kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling between his hands. His suit was rumpled, his eyes shadowed. I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't know what Richard was doing, but no one believes me. They will, I said, though my own certainty wavered. He shook his head. The wedding, they insisted on paying for half. Said it was tradition. But now, God, Mom, what if even that money was stolen? I thought of Rebecca taking credit for the cake I had paid for, of Richard publicly thanking her. Small deceptions that now seemed like clues to a larger scheme. What does Emily say? I asked. She's in shock. Keeps saying there must be a mistake, but the evidence is damning. He dragged a hand through his hair. Rebecca knew. She managed their personal finances. She had to know. The rage I'd buried rose hot in my chest. For years, Rebecca had dismissed me with silk smiles, her hand draped over my son's shoulder as if she had been there through the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the scraped knees. Now she had dragged him into something poisonous. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. My career might be over. Emily might lose her job too. Everything's falling apart. His eyes met mine, hollow and searching. Mom, I reached across the table, took his hand. For all the ways he had wounded me, he was still my son. Then we'll figure it out, one piece at a time. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of one. In the days that followed, he returned often, sometimes staying in the guest room. Emily had retreated to her parents' Beacon Hill home, loyal to the family name even as it crumbled. The apartment they'd bought together sat empty. One evening, as we sat on the porch, fireflies blinking in the dusk, he confessed the unspoken. I was so stupid. I let them convince me their world was better than yours, that they were better than you. I turned to him. Why didn't you tell me about the costs? About Rebecca taking credit? He faltered. Would I have believed you? Or would I have thought you were just trying to come between us? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His silence was enough. That's what we do as mothers, I said finally. We don't keep score. We don't demand credit. We just keep showing up. He looked at me, eyes glistening. I see you, Mom. I should have all along. The words didn't erase the past, but they cracked the wall between us, letting in the first thin ray of light. Still, the cost of my boundary was steep. Rebecca's anger simmered. Emily's distance hardened. Thomas's career dangled by a thread. For the first time, though, I wasn't the one scrambling to smooth the edges. I wasn't the invisible scaffolding holding everyone else's lives together. I had drawn a line, and I would not retreat from it. Boundaries aren't free. They cost comfort, approval, sometimes even love. But as I sat in my garden that night, the silver moon rising over the flowers I had tended with my own hands, I realized the trade was worth it. Better to be unseen and true than visible and erased. The letter came on a gray Tuesday, slipped into my mailbox between grocery store flyers and an electricity bill. The envelope bore the Hamilton law firm's crest in gold. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a letter written in precise legalese, accusing me of defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They demanded I retract the false information I had shared with Thomas, the receipts and emails I'd collected, or they would pursue all remedies available under Massachusetts law. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with something closer to fear. I had been a nurse for 35 years, trained to keep steady hands in chaos. But this letter made my fingers shake. For a moment, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Defamation? For telling my son the truth of what I had done, what I had paid? Yet the laughter never reached my lips. Instead, a familiar exhaustion washed over me, the kind that had me stitching hems at 5 a.m, canceling my cardiology appointments to save a dress. The kind that had me driving Thomas to practices after 12-hour shifts. Always sacrificing, always invisible. And now they wanted me silenced, too. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it on the kitchen table. The silence in the house pressed against me. I could almost hear Rebecca's voice, smooth and condescending. "Barbara, dear, you really mustn't make a scene." For the first time in weeks, the clarity I had fought for flickered. What if they ruined me? I had no fortune, no team of lawyers, no army of social connections. Just me and the little garden outside, the cedar box of memories, the manila envelope of proof. Was that enough? That night, I barely slept. Shadows stretched long across my bedroom ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face at the wedding, smiling as he raised a glass to another woman. The humiliation returned in waves, sharper now with the threat of legal fire behind it. By morning, I felt hollowed out, brittle. Nathan noticed immediately when he stopped by. "Mom," he said, eyeing the letter on the table. "What's this?" I explained, my voice steady out of habit more than strength. He skimmed the letter, his jaw tightening. "They can't do this. You didn't lie. You have the receipts, the emails. Truth doesn't always matter when people have money," I murmured. He looked at me, his eyes blazing with something I hadn't expected, protectiveness. "Then we fight. You're not alone in this." But I didn't feel like fighting. I felt tired, so very tired. For the next few days, I moved through life on autopilot. Work, groceries, laundry. The routines that had always kept me upright now felt heavy. I avoided my porch garden, afraid its brightness would mock the shadow spreading inside me. When the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. When Thomas texted asking if I was okay, I responded with a neutral, "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was collapsing quietly, the way women like me often do, without spectacle, without audience, just a slow dimming in the corners of the room. It was Olivia who pulled me back. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, her arms full of books and a thermos of coffee. "I brought something," she said, setting the books on my table. "What's this?" "Law." "Well, not exactly. My roommate's in law school. She said these could help me understand what's happening with the Hamiltons, and maybe help you too." I stared at her, this young woman with her mother's eyes, flipping open a textbook with yellow sticky notes jutting out. "You don't have to." "I know." She cut me off, her tone firm but kind. "But you've carried everyone else's weight for years. Let me carry some of yours." Her words hit a fault line inside me. I had been waiting for someone, Thomas, anyone, to say them. And here they were, spoken by my goddaughter, whose mother I had once comforted through chemo, whose childhood birthdays I had baked cakes for. The circle of care had come back around. As we pored over the pages, she explained what she'd learned. Defamation cases are hard to win, especially when the statements are true. They'd have to prove you lied with malicious intent. You didn't. You have proof. Something stirred in me, faint but present. Proof. I had the receipts, the emails, the photographs. They weren't weapons, but they were shields. Later, as we sipped coffee on the porch, Olivia leaned forward. You told me strength was holding yourself together when you wanted to fall apart. This is one of those times. Don't let them scare you into silence. Her conviction lit a small flame inside me. It wasn't roaring yet, but it flickered steadily against the darkness that had been closing in. That night, I pulled the Hamilton letter back out. I read it again, slower this time. The words still cut, but they didn't pierce as deep. I placed it beside my manila envelope of proof. For the first time, I didn't see myself as cornered prey. I saw myself as a witness, holding the record of what really happened. When Thomas stopped by a few days later, I was ready. He looked worn, his tie loose, his eyes red from sleepless nights. Emily wants me to tell the FBI I knew about her father's activities, he confessed. She says it'll help with a plea deal. If I don't, she says I'm betraying her. And what did you say? I asked. I told her no. I told her I wouldn't lie. He exhaled, shoulders slumping. She says that proves I was never really part of her family. I felt anger rise, but not at him, at the manipulation that had ensnared him. Maybe that's the first honest thing they've ever said. His eyes widened, then softened. Mom, what if they come after me? Legally? Financially? What if they drag me down with them? Then we fight, I said, echoing Nathan's words. But this time, we fight with truth. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw not just my son, but the boy who used to believe me capable of anything. You really think we can? I reached for his hand, steady now. I know we can. The Hamiltons had underestimated me. They thought I would crumble under humiliation, that I would fade into silence. They didn't understand that invisibility can be a kind of training. You learn to endure, to hold steady in shadows until it's time to step into light. For weeks, I had nearly given up, nearly let their letter become the final word. But Olivia's faith, Nathan's fire, Thomas's fragile honesty, they had reminded me who I was. A woman who had stitched hems at dawn, who had balanced lives in her hands in the ER, who had built a family out of ashes when her husband left. A woman who did not break. And as I sat at my table with the letter on one side and my proof on the other, I realized something powerful. The first spark of standing again wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about remembering myself. The morning of Thomas's FBI interview, I woke before dawn. The sky was still dark, the house hushed, but the air inside me buzzed with a strange clarity. For weeks, the Hamiltons had tried to frighten me into silence, with their polished smiles, their insinuations, their letters embossed in gold. But today was different. Today the truth had a chance to stand on its own. Thomas came into the kitchen looking pale, his tie hanging loose, his hands trembling. He was 32 years old, but in that moment he looked like the boy who once hid behind my legs during thunderstorms. I don't know if I can do this, he whispered. I set a cup of coffee in front of him. You can, because you're not alone. We drove into Boston together, the federal building rising ahead like a fortress. His lawyer, James, Nathan's old college friend, met us in the lobby. He was calm, practical, the kind of man who carried steadiness in his voice. Answer only what they ask, James reminded him. If you don't know, say you don't know. Don't guess. Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. Then he looked at me. Will you wait? Always, I said. For 4 hours, I sat in a sterile waiting area flipping through outdated magazines I couldn't read, the clock's hands dragging across the wall. When the door finally opened, Thomas and James emerged. Both looked weary, but not defeated. It went well, James said as we walked to the parking garage. They were interested in Richard's operations, not Thomas. They asked about Emily's request, and Thomas told the truth. That's all they needed. Relief rushed through me, but it was short-lived. In the car, Thomas's face was grim. They showed me documents, Mom. Accounts in my name. Accounts I never opened. Transactions I never authorized. James thinks Richard set me up as a scapegoat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Of course. They hadn't just erased me at the wedding. They had groomed my son to be disposable, a shield for their fraud. When we pulled into my driveway, Thomas looked at me with hollow eyes. I was just a pawn. I touched his hand. Not anymore. That night, I went back to my cedar box, pulling out not just the receipts from the wedding, but every piece of proof I had collected since. Bank transfers, emails, contracts, things I had saved without thinking they'd ever matter. They did now. The next morning, I slid a folder across the table to James. This is everything I have, I told him. It shows the money I spent, what Rebecca claimed as hers, how they manipulated appearances. Use it however you need. James's eyes widened as he flipped through. This is meticulous. You kept all of this? I kept everything, I said simply, because that's what invisible women do. We archive. We hold evidence of our existence in the small corners no one notices until it matters. When news broke weeks later that Rebecca herself was under investigation, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the knock on my door one Friday evening. It was Rebecca. She stood on my porch in another flawless suit, though the polish couldn't hide the cracks around her eyes. For the first time, she looked less like royalty and more like a woman cornered. Barbara, she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. We need to talk. I didn't invite her in. I let the screen door stand between us. About what? Her smile flickered. This investigation, it's tearing families apart. Emily is distraught. Thomas, he's vulnerable. I think we can help each other. I raised an eyebrow. Help each other? If you withdraw some of what you've supplied, if you stop pushing this narrative, I can assure you Thomas will be protected. I still have influence. People listen to me. I let silence stretch. The wind rattled the trees behind her. Finally, I said, I don't need your influence. I have the truth. Her eyes sharpened. Truth is a flexible thing in courtrooms. Reputation is what lasts. And there it was, the Hamilton Creed, laid bare. Image over integrity. Appearance over reality. I leaned closer to the screen. Do you know what reputation lasts, Rebecca? The one your children whisper about you when the crowd is gone. The one your grandchildren will inherit when the headlines fade. That's the reputation you should worry about. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might spit venom, but she turned abruptly and walked back to her car. Tires crunched down the street, carrying her polished world away from my porch. I closed the door and exhaled, my knees shaking. Boundaries are one thing, confrontation is another. But I had faced her and hadn't flinched. The next day, Thomas told me Emily had asked for a separation. She had begged him again to lie for her father, and when he refused, she accused him of betrayal. She said I was never really one of them, he admitted. And what did you say? I asked. He gave a small, weary smile. I said maybe that was the first honest thing they ever told me. I pulled him into my arms, this grown man who was finally learning to stand on his own truth. I'm proud of you, I whispered. For months, I had carried humiliation like a stone in my chest. But now, as the Hamilton empire cracked in the news, as Thomas began to pull away from them, as Rebecca's mask slipped at my front door, I realized something profound. My silence had never been weakness. My quiet had been preparation. The Hamiltons had mistaken dignity for fragility. They thought applause could replace love, that money could rewrite memory. But evidence speaks louder than champagne toasts. Receipts don't lie. When Thomas filed for divorce, the papers cited irreconcilable differences. Emily contested briefly, then folded when it became clear her family's assets were being frozen. The glamorous apartment was sold, the money held in escrow for victims of the fraud. Thomas moved into my house permanently. For now, he said, just until he found his footing. But in the evenings, when he sat across from me at the kitchen island, sharing meals instead of phone calls cut short, I felt something repairing inside us. Not everything. Some cracks stay visible, but enough. The Hamiltons had wanted me invisible. Instead, I had become undeniable. One afternoon, as I trimmed roses in my garden, Thomas came outside. He stood quietly for a while, watching me work. Finally, he said, "I used to think strength meant being in control, making the room look at you. But now I think it's what you did. You didn't shout, you didn't collapse, you just kept standing." I brushed soil from my gloves. Strength is remembering who you are when everyone else tries to tell you otherwise. He nodded, eyes steady. "I see that now. I see you." The words landed with more weight than any toast could have carried. Autumn arrived in Boston with a sharpness I hadn't felt in years. The maples turned fire red, the air crisp with wood smoke, and my garden blazed in shades of gold. Thomas and I sat on the back porch, mugs of tea warming our hands, the silence between us softer now. He told me about the letter from the prosecutor's office, how some of his belongings were being returned. "They're finally giving me back the pieces of my life," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I studied him, the slump in his shoulders lighter, the hollowness in his eyes beginning to fade. He had been stripped of illusions, of the safety net he thought the Hamilton name would provide. But maybe that was a gift. Illusions, once shattered, leave room for truth. He hesitated, then pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside lay a silver bracelet with a single rose charm. "It's not much," he said, his voice catching. "But I wanted you to have something that reminds you of how strong you are. You kept blooming, even when everything tried to cut you down." I fastened it on my wrist, the cool weight settling against my skin. "It's beautiful, Thomas. But you know what matters most?" "What?" "That you finally see me. Not as a shadow, not as an afterthought, as your mother. The real one." His eyes glistened. "You're the one who made me the man I am. The good parts, anyway." I touched his cheek, feeling the stubble rough under my hand, the same face I had kissed goodnight thousands of times. "Don't forget that again. Life didn't turn perfect overnight. He still faced depositions, still read his name in articles tying him to a family empire that had defrauded hundreds. People whispered. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with pity. But when he came home at night, when we sat at my kitchen table with simple dinners and shared quiet, there was no shame, just truth. Rebecca and Richard faded into the background of headlines, names attached to scandal, not society galas. Emily disappeared too, her loyalty welded to the family she couldn't separate herself from. Thomas signed the divorce papers without ceremony, his signature steady, his hands no longer shaking. And me? I didn't wait for an apology anymore. I had stopped needing permission to exist. My garden grew, my friendships deepened, and Olivia visited often, bringing laughter and stories of her own future. The house felt alive again, not because it was full, but because I was no longer hollow. One evening, standing in my garden under a silver moon, I thought of the wedding arch stripped bare after the flowers had been taken down. At the time, I had seen it as emptiness. Now I saw it differently. The structure had remained, strong even without adornment, like me. Strength isn't the applause in a crowded tent. It isn't being named in a toast. It's walking out when you're erased. It's telling the truth even when it costs you comfort. It's blooming again and again despite being cut down. If Thomas had learned that lesson, then maybe everything I had endured was not wasted. And if I had learned to choose myself, to stop shrinking into invisibility, then maybe I had gained more than I'd lost. As for Rebecca, I sometimes wondered if she ever understood the difference between reputation and love. A reputation can be bought. Love cannot. I pressed the rose charm between my fingers, the metal warming from my skin. A small token, yes, but also a symbol. Truth endures. So I ask you, what would you do if your own child erased you in front of the world? Would you disappear quietly? Or would you rise, not for applause, but for yourself? I chose to rise. And if my story has touched you, if it reminds you of battles you fought in silence, then share it. Tell me where you're watching from. Let's make sure no one's strength goes unseen. And if you want to walk with me through more stories like this, don't forget to stay with us at Roots and Secrets. Because sometimes, the truths that hurt the most are the ones that set us free.